There's an old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And when it comes to the beauty industry, that could not be more accurate. Beauty brands are always trying to convince us that the products that they're launching are somehow new and different than what we've seen before. But if you look closely, you start to realize it's just all an illusion. We're sold this idea of having choices, but the beauty industry has gotten so oversaturated with so many similar products, there's not a lot of difference between all of them. And yes, sometimes the brands innovate and we'll get something new and exciting, but it's not very often. And I look around at my collection sometimes and I start to realize that I have so many of the same things, they're just in different packaging with different names. And sometimes I truly get a product home and I feel tricked, I feel deceived because it was sold as one thing and really it's not any different than a million other things that I already had. Now, don't get me wrong, I still love makeup and I'm not here to discourage you from buying makeup because I know those of you who watch my channel especially love makeup, right? That's why we're here. But I do think now more than ever, it's become really important to think critically about our purchases before we buy anything. And we need to have the most information that we can before we spend our hard-earned money. And in today's video, I'm gonna go over some of the strategies that beauty brands basically use to trick us into buying makeup that we don't need. So let's go ahead and jump right in and get started. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and just get ready while we chat, and I'll leave all the products that I'm using linked down in the description box below. So one of the biggest issues that I've seen is brands repackaging and re-promoting existing products that have been around for years, sometimes decades, and making us think that they're something new. And this can cause so much disappointment for a lot of us because we expect to try this and have it be something game-changing, groundbreaking, something we haven't seen before. And we're like, it's really just like several other products that I already own. So a few examples of this. The first one I thought of, and this is kind of the one that sparked this whole idea for me, is barrier creams. Barrier creams are this big, huge thing right now. Every brand is coming out with them. And the whole concept is that they are gonna protect your skin's barrier, which, you know, to a dry skin person like me, that sounds wonderful. And there's been a lot of emphasis lately on protecting your barrier. But if you dig a little bit deeper, if you look at the ingredients of some of these products, there's absolutely nothing in there that hasn't been in other moisturizers since forever. Think about ceramides, niacinamide, squalane, glycerin, shea butter. There's literally nothing novel about any of that. CeraVe is a perfect example of a brand that's been around for decades, and their products have always been focused on building and maintaining your skin's barrier. They've always had ceramides, hence the name CeraVe. But because it's not a trendy brand like Rhode or The Ordinary or any of these other brands that are coming out with these barrier creams or barrier serums for that matter, we don't hear as much about them. But I know dermatologists have been recommending CeraVe for many years because it is a solid brand and it truly works. But they're not using that buzzword of barrier, so it's just not as hyped up as some of the other things that we've seen. Another example is blurring products, right? We see so many powders out there lately that say blurring powder, but what they basically are just really finely milled setting powders that give a mattified, blurred effect to your skin. They've been around forever, but throw the word blurring in there, and you think all of a sudden it must have some sort of new technology that's gonna make my skin look even more blurred and more airbrushed. One example is the new one from One Size. This is actually called the Ultimate Blurring Setting Powder, and it's marketed to blur your pores and airbrush your skin, but it's just a talc-based formula. It's nothing new. If you look at the ingredients, it actually has so many of the same ones as the Laura Mercier setting powder, which has been around forever, or the Hourglass Veil setting powder has a similar ingredient list. Even the Maybelline Fit Me loose powder, which I know is one of the more popular ones from the drugstore, has very similar ingredients. So is this truly a new product? No. Any of those other powders are going to blur your skin just as much. They're just not using that as a claim. Another example is blurring blushes. This is something that's been really, really trendy from the summertime right through now. You see the new ones from Cali Ray, Huda Beauty, countless other brands, even Hard Candy at the drugstore came out with blurring blushes, and they're beautiful, but are they new? Absolutely not. They're just that moussey texture that looks really blurring on your skin. So some other examples of ones that have been out for a long time are the NYX Sweet Cheeks liquid blush. Those have that beautiful blurring finish. NARS had their Air Matte blushes from a couple years back in the little pot. I'm sure there are others that I can't think of off the top of my head, but it's really just a marketing game at the end of the day. They think up a new word and suddenly it makes people think, I have to run right out and buy this because it's going to be different than the 1,300 blushes I've already tried before. Another example would be multi-use products. We've been seeing these a lot lately, products that you can use on both your lips and your cheeks. This is another thing that's been around for years and years. I think about the Stila convertible color, which has been around since at least I was in my 20s, maybe earlier than that, so a good 20 years ago. The multiple from NARS is another one that could be used on eyes, lips, and cheeks. These are classic products that have really stood the test of time. Another one would have to be skin tints, and this one really irks me because they're literally tinted moisturizers. It's a sheer base product that has some skincare ingredients in it, very, very light coverage, and a dewy finish, but I see people advertising these skin tints like they're this new novel idea, and really they're not. In fact, I think, if anything, I think the brands, in addition to calling them something else, they're also putting them in new and different packaging. If you think back to like the 90s and early 2000s when tinted moisturizers were really popular, they used to come in more like of this squeezy tube packaging. Now everybody's putting them in a dropper. I think it makes people feel like they're getting more of a skincare experience when they use it, but really it's just a sheer dewy base product. And I think in all of these examples, the formulas can vary by brand. Everything's going to be slightly different, but for the most part, if you think of just the overall experience, are these products really novel, game-changing products? No. These are things that we've seen repeated over and over again over the decades. And that sort of brings me into the next problem, which is trends. Trends are a huge way that brands can take something old and make it seem new again. So if you think back to the matte lipstick trend of 2016, matte liquid lipsticks were everywhere, and I remember this well because I absolutely hated them. I have really dry lips, and I always felt like those formulas just made my lips look terrible, so dry and cracked, and they used to settle into all the lines. And I tried really hard to make them work for me. I tried formulas from every brand across the spectrum, hoping that one of them would be different, but they weren't. They were all exactly the same. And then after a couple years of that, we started to see lip oils and lip glosses become popular again. And then after we got tired of those, it was satin lipsticks. And then we're kind of going back toward the matte lipstick trend again. And then we've come full circle. So it just seems like every few years we keep living out the same trend cycles rather than moving on to something new and different. Everybody's wearing lip glosses for a while. Then we get bored and switch to matte lipsticks. Then we get bored of that and we go back to lip glosses again. Same thing with foundations. First, matte is really popular. Everybody's powdering the heck out of their faces and making these super matte complexions. Then we swing to the opposite side of the spectrum with super dewy skin. Now it's kind of going back to matte again. And I think trends are actually one of the biggest drivers of overconsumption because the trends are convincing us that we need this new thing rather than taking a look at what's actually going to look best for us. Instead of jumping on the matte lipstick trend back in 2016, I should have just told myself, you know what? I feel better in tinted lip balms or lip glosses or more hydrating formulas. I don't have to do every trend just because it's what everybody else is doing. And I think that is so important to just remember. And yes, sometimes I do get curious. I wonder if maybe a brand has come out with finally a matte liquid lipstick that isn't drying. So I tend to try them anyway, just because I keep hoping. But one thing I've definitely learned is just to kind of take my time. If there's a product I'm not sure of, I think I need to sit on it a little bit. I need to wait and see over time, how's the public perception of this? Are other people that I know with dry lips enjoying this product, or are they not enjoying it? And I think in that case, it really makes sense to just like wait a little while, not impulse buy these products, and make sure that it's really going to be something truly different, because most of the time I feel like it's not. Another issue that I've been seeing too is that brands seem to have stopped innovating and creating truly new products. They're just basically copying each other. And part of this is because of dupe culture. Part of this is just because of social media. If a brand sees a product going viral from another brand, then they're in a rush to just create something similar to try to capitalize on the success of that product. So one pretty easy example to point to is Charlotte Tilbury's Hollywood Flawless Filter. That product actually existed for quite a while, but for some reason, somebody made it go viral on TikTok and everybody decided that they had to have it. And then a lot of other brands started rushing to create dupes of it, and not just drugstore brands, but other high-end brands as well. Everybody was making their own version of this glowy primer. The point is, glowy primers did exist before Hollywood Flawless Filter even came out. And when that product launched and people were really confused by it. I know some influencers were putting it on like it was a glowy foundation. They didn't realize it wasn't supposed to offer a lot of coverage, and I remember people being really disappointed about it. But I think a lot of the confusion was because of the way the brand was marketing the product. They didn't come out and say, like, this is a glowy primer. They basically called it a flawless filter, which makes you think that it's like a perfecting product that's going to make you look flawless. And I think a lot of people thought it was supposed to be something with coverage. It just wasn't super clear. And I think a lot of products that come out are like that these days. Another example would be the Dior Rosy Glow Blush. That one went viral in the summer of 2023. And after that, every brand started coming out with their own version. And it didn't even have to be a new blush. Some brands were just releasing that color within their existing blush range. And I think that goes to show you that instead of creating a new or innovative blush formula, brands would rather just kind of jump on a trend and make their version of something that already exists rather than coming up with something new. Lip oil is another big example of this. Dior's lip oil went viral on TikTok and social media in general, and every brand had to come out with a similar lip oil. Every drugstore brand, some of the high-end brands, and they even made the packaging look really similar. So you knew it was supposed to be a copy. And there's really only so much you can do with a lip oil formula at the end of the day. So I felt like all of them were kind of the same. When I tried all of the different dupes for the Dior, there wasn't a huge variation. I mean, there were some that I liked maybe a little bit more than others, but for the most part, it was just a lip oil. It wasn't super groundbreaking. The only thing I think that could be helpful is that, you know, when the drugstore brands make their version of it, it can save people money. And I think that's probably the biggest point of difference when it comes to brands copying each other. And the one area where I think it could be a good thing, because not everybody can afford this luxury lip oil. And if you can get something really similar at the drugstore for less, then I do think that that's a good thing. The biggest issue for me is just that it creates a little bit of fatigue when it comes to buying products, because there's just so many choices and they're all the same. You just don't really know which one to pick. And this constant cycle that the brands are in of copying each other is just discouraging creativity and innovation. The brands are just replicating something that they know is going to sell rather than experimenting with new finishes, new textures, new formulas. And lately, it just seems like the makeup world is in this constant race to jump on a trend rather than to start the trends. And there's a few reasons for that. So the first one is that I think brands are just reluctant to take risks because it's safer to follow what's already been proven to work. It's a quick buck. Basically, they are out to make as much money as they can with as little effort as they can. It takes a lot of money to go into the lab and to try to create new formulas and to come up with new ideas. You have to hire teams of people to do that. It's so much easier to just say, let's go ahead and make our version of that. Also, I think brands are using influencers in this whole game as well. Instead of creating a product that is going to stand on its own and is basically going to sell itself, they need influencers to go and sell these products for them. So what they'll do is pay influencers to push them. And I'm not saying that every influencer does this, but I see it a lot over on TikTok. And basically they just blindly push these products for a paycheck. And the reason I'm saying that is because I know a lot of you guys aren't over on TikTok, but I go there quite a bit. And when I tell you, I see influencers pushing the most basic products, things that have already existed for a long time, and they're trying to make them go viral. And they act like the most basic product is something totally new that we've never seen before. And the type of language that they're using, it's like they're reading it off of a brief that the brand gave them. They all use the same words to describe the product, and it's just like watching a whole bunch of ads, basically. And In some cases, I can give them the benefit of the doubt because they're younger influencers, maybe they're teenagers, and maybe they truly haven't seen a product like this before. Maybe they've just gotten into makeup recently. So to them, it does seem groundbreaking and new. But it's not just them. I've seen people who are my age and older, people who have been using makeup forever, who have been in the beauty space for years and years, and they know, like they've tried other products that are like this, but nobody really bothers to sit down and say, hey, there's this new product, but let me compare it to X, Y, and Z that's already in my collection. And you can see that it's really not that much different. Why would they say that? Then they're not going to get paid, you know? And again, I'm not saying this about everybody. There are definitely some people I watch who do go through their collection and compare new products to old products, or even if they're not doing a direct comparison, they might say, this seems similar to whatever. And then I think it just gives the consumer more information to say, hey, you know what? I already have that. Maybe I don't really need to buy this, or maybe I should do a little bit more research before I do. So I think the downside for consumers is that when you have a flood of really similar products hitting the market, it can be hard to tell, like what's good, what's not. Is this already the same as something that I had before, which can be really tricky if the brands are promoting it using a different type of name. Like I talked about earlier in the video, if they're coming up with some new buzzword for the product. I feel like instead of offering something new, brands are just giving us the same things in different packaging or with a different name. And then as consumers, we get caught up in this cycle of buying without getting anything really new and different. I have so many products here in this room that are virtual copies of each other, just from different brands. So even though I have a lot of products, there isn't a lot of variety going on. And the brands know what they're doing. They know that they're playing to people's FOMO, making people feel like they're missing out if they don't have this new type of formula or this new product. If you look at all the different categories of makeup, you can find nearly identical products in just about every category. Think of neutral eyeshadow palettes. How many of them are out there? And yes, there are formula differences between them, but the end result on your eyes is going to be likely really similar between all of them. Or like we talked about, how many glowy primers are on the market, how many lip oils are on the market. I really wish that rather than imitating, brands would focus more on innovating. And we have seen it before. It's not that brands don't innovate. I think it's just really few and far between. If you take, for example, the Beauty Blender. The Beauty Blender was a game changer. This isn't a Beauty Blender, it's a copy, but you know, I have a lot of copies of Beauty Blenders now. Everybody decided to jump on board, but the very first time a Beauty Blender was released, it was like, oh my gosh, it was this aha moment, because before that, we used brushes to blend our foundation or our fingers, and beauty sponges existed, but they were just those little flat makeup sponges that you could get at the drugstore in a big pack. You know, they weren't like these luxury, big poofy sponges, and they just were something really new and different. And look at how many copies there are now. You can find sponges like that everywhere at every price point. But that was a perfect example of a brand really sitting down and creating something amazing. Another example would be like magnetic eyelashes, right? For years, people were gluing eyelashes on, and then all of a sudden, the magnetic ones came out, and the ones with the magnetic eyeliner. Like, there were so many cool innovations when it comes to lashes. I think K-beauty brands are probably the most innovative. You see cushion foundations coming out, or lip stains that are more hydrating and glossy. These are things that really hadn't been done before, and they were born out of original thinking. Another company I can think of just off the top of my head is Olaplex. Before Olaplex, we were basically told that you can't repair your hair. You have to just cover it up with silicones to kind of make it look smoother, but there's no way that you can actually repair the bonds. And then Olaplex came along and changed the game. And now we have so many bond building products. L'Oreal has a line, you know, a lot of drugstore ones do actually. K18, obviously. I mean, there's a ton of them out there now. But the bottom line is these brands didn't rely on tricking us into thinking something was new. They actually did create something new, and it was really, really amazing. So off the top of my head, some things that we could still really use in the beauty industry would be like truly inclusive shade ranges. I know that we've had some good starts, like Fenty has a really good shade range. There are a few brands that I think have really expanded the conversation around skin tones and undertones and all of that, but I still feel like there's work to be done. So many brands are not focusing on their foundation ranges, and they're basically just throwing us some shades that honestly sometimes don't even make sense. For example, I have light skin, but I have a cool undertone, and cool undertones are very underserved in the foundation and just complexion market in general. Just about every foundation that I try looks yellow against my skin, even if it's labeled as cool. There are very few that actually have that pink undertone that I need for it to match my skin. And in addition to getting undertones wrong, of course, we also have brands that just are not expanding enough into the deeper shade ranges. So I still think that brands can really work on that. And if some of them would take the time and focus on an issue like that rather than trying to come up with these trendy products or trying to dupe somebody else, I think they would really attract some loyal followers who would buy their products over and over again. I think another thing that brands really need to work on are SPFs and just making them better. I think wearing SPF is so important, but still we have these issues where a lot of them won't work for deeper skin tones, especially the mineral formulas can look really chalky or have a white cast. So it would be nice if brands could continue to innovate as far as that goes, and just in general, making the formulas feel a little bit nicer on your skin. K-beauty brands are already kind of way ahead of the Western brands when it comes to this, and I think we really need to step it up and try to improve the SPFs as much as we can. Matte liquid lipsticks, this is something that I think somebody somewhere could try to find a formula that lasts, that's transfer proof, but also doesn't dry out your lips. And these are just a few things that I'm just thinking up off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are honestly unlimited possibilities when it comes to brands coming up with new things. I think back to ColourPop and their Super Shock shadows. That was something that was so new and different and interesting, and nothing against ColourPop because I still love them as a brand, but I really wish they would go back to creating products like that rather than doing Disney collabs or movie collabs. It just seems like the uniqueness that they started out with has slowly been going away. Every once in a while they do still come up with something cool, but I don't know. I just feel like brands have lost their way a little bit and really have all become clones of each other. And sometimes it's hard to see what made each brand special. They've sort of lost their unique identities. And in doing so, they're trying to trick all of us into thinking that these new products that they're launching are new and different when really it's just the same old stuff. So anyway, I think it's important for all of us to see through the hype, to see through the marketing buzzwords, and really make sure that before we spend our hard-earned money on something, we make sure that it's really something that's truly different, something that we don't already have in our collection. And if everybody stops rushing to buy these products, then brands will maybe take a step back and be like, okay, maybe viral and trendy isn't necessarily the way to go, but it's important to always speak with our wallets because at the end of the day, it's all about money. And if they're not seeing returns on products like this, if people are getting makeup fatigue, which I think is definitely something that's been happening lately, they'll have to kind of shift back the other direction and start to come up with some new and unique products. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this down below. And if you'd like to see some more videos like this about overconsumption or my thoughts on drugstore makeup recently, I'll put some videos right here that you could check out next. And I want to thank all of you just for taking the time out of your day to sit here and watch this video. I truly appreciate it. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all in my next one. Take care, guys. Bye.